For more than 10 years, Janice Beaton Fine Cheese has been known as Calgary's best place to buy artisanal, fresh-cut cheeses from around the world. Owner Janice Beaton joins me today from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, where she's visiting her sister, giving us the unique opportunity to taste some local cheeses and wine together. Welcome, Janice.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So tell me about how your own passion for cheese started.
Well, it started really a long time ago here in Cape Breton, in fact, when I was a wee little girl, and we made cheese on our farm. And it's one of my most vivid memories is that of my grandma making cheese. I mean, everything from us extracting the rennet to do the coagulation to the whole process of aging and where our press was up behind the chicken house, and I mean, hanging on her skirt. I was just so fascinated by the whole process. So that's where it all began, and it's just grown, I think, since that time.
Absolutely. Those first tastes often stay with you forever. What kind of cheese did she make?
Well, as we say here, homemade cheese. I mean, what people, and they still do it, it's basically a raw cow's milk cheese that's aged anywhere from a couple weeks to months, depending on how people like to have it. So it's almost like a Wensleydale, one of the English cheeses. It's got a bit of an open face, crumbly texture, and very cowy.
I like that. It's kind of the equivalent of describing wine as yummy.
Yes, whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. So now you own this marvelous cheese retail shop, charcuterie. You host classes. You've got a kitchen where people are dining area now. That's really taking your passion for cheese a long way from those early days in Cape Breton. How did you develop that kind of full-fledged professional interest in it?
Well, I think like lots of entrepreneurs, an idea presents itself, and it came from a friend of mine when I was kind of between things after I'd sold a coffee business and was casting about for the next thing. And she said, "You should open a cheese shop," because I probably, ate and knew a bit more about cheese than the average person. But anyway, I just thought, she's right. And 5 months later, after raising capital and trying to learn about cheese, which really just happened on the job once the shop opened, building the store, all those things that are part of starting a small business and getting open before Christmas, which was, of course, very critical. So, yeah, here we are 12 years later.
Wow. Now, why are people so obsessive about cheese? I know about obsession in wine, but I know you're probably encountering obsession in cheese. What is it about cheese that just people want to follow it?
Yesterday a guy on the beach here I haven't seen for 30 years said, "I love cheese." I mean, all kinds of cheese. He was going on rhapsodizing, and I, unsolicited really, other than, my friend saying Janice owns a cheese shop in Calgary. And I think cheese is a really simple product, but it's very sensual. There's something about it that appeals to our senses. I think the visual, the smell, such simple ingredients can yield such profound variety. I think there are many things about it, but the sensuality of it is, I think, a big factor for a lot of people.
You're talking my language. When it comes to wine, yes, that sounds so much like wine. And I think sometimes, they both start with liquids. They're both fermented, and they both get more complex as they age, at least the best kind do. So what similarities do you see with wine and cheese? Are they along that line or anything else?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Natalie. I think there are so many things that wine and cheese have in common. And I mean, the whole concept of terroir, that environment in which grapes are grown or animals feed. I mean, oftentimes, when I teach classes or, at events that we host, we often talk about the fact that when you think of grapevines growing in soil that is also providing, say, the grasses that goats are grazing on, there's no big surprise that there's a similar flavor profile between the wine and the cheese from that region. So, I often use it as a general rule of thumb when people are thinking about pairing. But so they have so much in common. And the thing about wine that I love too is that wine and cheese complement each other so well, because texture, they're liquid versus solid, and that acidity that many, white wines in particular have is such a perfect counterpoint to the fat and the protein in cheeses. So I think, they go hand in hand for so many reasons.
Excellent insights. And I know it's really hard to generalize about Canadian cheese, just like Canadian wine, because we've got such a diversity of styles from coast to coast. But if you were to try to generalize, what are there some factors that make Canadian cheese different for you, say, versus France or Switzerland, just on the very broad level?
That's a question I haven't thought about before. I have to say that I don't see, I don't see that there's something about Canadian cheese that makes it unique and different from cheeses from, countries in Europe, for example. I think that I'm really proud of what our cheesemakers in Canada are doing. I think coast to coast we have fabulous things, and I know there's many more for me to try, many that I haven't tasted yet, and I tend to get to all of them. But I think that the styles of cheese, I think people often pattern cheeses that so many immigrants have come. Canada is made up of so many immigrants from other countries, which is wonderful, and people bring recipes from their home country and have it and then have those recipes express themselves here as a function of the animals, the area they're in, whatever the case might be. So I think it's interesting to see the expressions of cheeses from other countries made here. I think that is what makes it unique. It's if someone's making something that's like a Gruyere, if they are from Switzerland and they're making that cheese here, it's going to be very different than what they made or what they had back in their home country. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I'd approach that one.
That's excellent. And again, just to draw another parallel with wine, that's exactly what has happened with a lot of our wine regions, both in Nova Scotia, Niagara, and even out on BC. They were immigrants that first started the wine industry, especially from Germany or Austria, those cool climate grapes that can survive our climate. But the expression of the wine here is completely different from, say, a German Riesling or an Austrian one, that sort of thing. So, again, that's they were just made for each other, I think. Cheese and wine.
An interesting thought, I was thinking about this a little bit, in fact, because one of the cheeses we're going to taste in a little bit is that beautiful Avonlea cheddar from Prince Edward Island. But Scott Linkletter, when he decided to make his beautiful English style, the only English cloth-bound cheddar or style cheese that's being made in Canada today, he and Armand, his cheesemaker, went to the Orkneys and worked with a cheesemaker there for months. And, so Armand really learned the craft of true English cheddar making. So when you look at what was created on Prince Edward Island, it's very different than English cheddar. It's the same in style. They really stuck to the principles and traditions of cheddar making. But because of the terroir, because of, the milk from the cows, I believe Holsteins are pretty much the breed that provide the milk for the cheese. But when you think about that, it's a very different cheese from an English cheddar, yet very similar. So it's a great example of what happens, as we're describing about, creating something in a different place with the same recipe.
Absolutely. You've done your job. I'm hungry. Let's try that.
All right, let's get to it.
Let's try that Avonlea cheddar, because I was able to get some of this here where I am in Ottawa. It was the only local one I could find, but you gave me some substitutes. But let's try the Avonlea cloth-bound. As you said, the only cloth-bound cheese in Canada. What does that mean, cloth-bound, and how does it affect the cheese?
Well, that's going back to, the process of making cheddar in England, a long time ago, and it was a means by which cheddaring in and of itself is a process where when something is cheddared in the cheese making process, it's cut basically in a grid pattern. Once the curd forms, it's cut in a grid pattern, and then it's packed into the molds, and then there will be weights, it'll be in a press, and where the whey is going to be extracted. So the molds would be lined with the cloth, and that back in the day really was a way. It was a means of preservation. It was a way of protecting the cheese that is held in the same way today by those traditional cheddar makers. Cheddars in England are cloth bound, or bandaged is another term that people use, and sometimes they have a bit of a wax coating on the band as well.
We don't eat that, right?
We don't eat that. Yeah. Okay. When we get our wheels of Avonlea, and they're fairly big. They're a 7 kilo drum. Pardon me, 16. Anyway, we pull the bandage off. They come bandage intact, and we pull it off. So it's a fun part of the job.
So what do you get when you taste this Avonlea cheddar? And yeah, tell me.
Sorry.
No, okay. I'll talk, you eat. But you were talking about the Holstein cow, so I'm also interested in how their milk expresses itself versus another type of cattle.
Well, I think that's a in some ways probably a fine point, in that milk being the sort of the substrate, if you will, that cheesemakers work with, and then they work their magic depending upon what their particular predilections might be in terms of the process of cheesemaking, or where they want to end up with a finished product. But there's some things, protein content can differ from breed to breed. Fat content can differ. So those things then, when they work with those factors, can really affect how the finished product winds up. So, but I think, when I taste this cheddar, I love it so much. I just think it's so fabulous. And it's great that it's a cheese that's federally licensed, because that means it's available across the country. So, but for me, and maybe it's just because I know it's from Prince Edward Island, but I just think it tastes like mashed potatoes and butter.
Oh, now I'm not getting
not so bad.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. As long as the butter is melting. Oh, it is beautiful, isn't it? It is bright and sunshiny, almost. The taste of yellow.
The texture. Oh, that's a great way to put it. The taste of yellow. It's a joyful cheese, and it's got a fabulous texture. It's dense, creamy, but not too dry. They've done a spectacular job of really, I think, creating a wonderful variation on the theme of an English cloth-bound cheddar made in the traditional style. Absolutely. But I do think it's earthy, and that's, if people, when we have our non-traditional cheddars here, i.e. they're not made in those drums and bandaged in cloth, I think often they're not as vegetal and earthy as an English cheddar is. They're often not going to be as sharp as a lot of us, we make great cheddar here in Canada, and a lot of them, people are looking for tang and sharpness, and I don't experience that the same way in an English cheddar, nor do I in this cheddar from Cow's Creamery.
Oh, it's true. It is. It's all very integrated, balanced is how I would describe it if it were a wine. Yeah. And so, speaking of that, the cheese should not stand alone. What wine?
Well, I was wondering when we were going to get to the wine.
Thirsty. So we've got some great Nova Scotia wines that you've suggested today. What one would you start with? Which one?
Well, I think I would, based on this cheese, I would start with the Luckett Vineyards 2011 Tidal Bay.
All righty.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's going to be the match for this one.
Okay, and why are you thinking that? Because that's sounds good to me.
I think because what I've learned, because I've been tasting some Tidal Bays from different wineries here, what I've learned, it is an off-dry grape varietal, that's what we end up with. But what I like about this one is that it has really great acidity. And as I mentioned earlier, acidity in wine is just such a partner to cheese. But in the case of the Avonlea, because it's dense and it's earthy, and I think there's something about the acidity and the off-dry. There's something slightly apple-y to me about this wine. Yeah. And I think that, when you think apples and cheddar, I've often paired ciders with this cheese, and I think there's something apple-y. Maybe it's the Annapolis Valley piece that's coming through in the wine, being the home of many great apple varieties. But I really like the acidity. So you're ahead of me, I think. I better see what this is like.
Yeah, you catch up. I'll talk, You
But
drink.
you talk about the Tidal Bay or whatever.
Well, I've got Luckett's Tidal Bay, and Tidal Bay, as you probably know, is a new appellation, a hot new one, or a cool new one, I should say. Well, I've got Yost Tidal Bay, and I've got Gaspereau Tidal Bay. And what I love about all three of these wines, because I've tasted them recently, is that they're very, there's that apple note, almost apple blossom, almost a bit floral. And so it reminds me a little bit of Argentine Torrontés or Viognier, sort of this profusion of fresh meadow, which to me would go dovetail right into a cheese. So you've got the maybe the more earthy or grassy taste with the cheese and the meadow flowers in the glass. And I think it's just lovely. And the acidity helps too. It really does. Is the acidity really a match for the salt in the cheese? Is that what it's dealing with in the cheese?
I would say more particularly it's dealing with the fat and the protein.
Okay.
Both of which are friends. You know, I don't hold either of those things in any ill repute at all. I think fat and protein are great things, and so having acidity like this wine, and I think you nailed it, Natalie, when you talk about meadow flowers. I mean, I get that. It's like wildflowers. I mean, it's
power
very
of
floral,
suggestion.
but the apple, you know, that fruit, that sort of apple fruit character is definitely there, and I really think that these are the things that really lift the cheese. I mean, the cheese is great, but I think the wine, I think they complement each other so well that they make each other better.
Absolutely, and that's what it's all about, increasing your pleasure with the two together rather than on their own. Janice, we're going to continue this conversation because we have got more cheeses and more wines to taste here, but we're going to pause, and we'll be back with you soon to taste some more. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.